Good morning from the campus of the United States Sports Academy. This is Sports Talk. I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden. I serve as moderator for our weekly program at this time every Wednesday morning. We also invite various members of the faculty to come and add their contributions and observations. To today's panel, my immediate right is Dr. Steve Butler, who is our Dean of Student Services, Dean of Academic Affairs. To my immediate left is Dr. Tim Foley, Dean of Student Services. And to my far left is Dr. Fred Cromartie, Director of Doctoral Studies. A lot of us have seen a lot of action in the last 2 weeks in college football, and I know we're into baseball, and didn't Baumgartner look fantastic last night in the first game of the series? But I've always been fascinated with polls. And I realize that they're always a function of the media and how the media tries to drum up attention. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose of preseason and perhaps even early season college football polls. We're doing this because next Tuesday is going to be the first poll that is released by the College Football Playoff Committee. And that's going to set 25 teams. They're going to set 25 teams because eventually that poll is going to indicate who's going to be not only the top 4 teams in the playoff, but also who is going to be in which bowls. So if we take a look, and we've done a little bit of research here, we took the first 2 polls of the season, and then we took a poll after week 5, and then the most recent poll, week 9. If we do that comparison, we see that in the second week in the AP poll, we're just using the AP poll as a standard, Mississippi State and TCU were not even ranked. They were down there, others receiving votes, whereas USC and UCLA were ranked rather high compared to what they are now, 14 and 11 respectively. Notre Dame was 16 and Ole Miss was 15. Now, taking a look at the recent AP polls, we find a dramatic turn of events and fortunes. Mississippi State is number 1, Ole Miss is number 2 or number 3, depending on which one you look at. Notre Dame is 7, TCU is 10, while UCLA is the very bottom at 25, and Southern Cal is 20. Stanford, who was highly ranked at the beginning of the season, up at number 11, is not even receiving votes, and it's the same way with Texas A&M now. So I'm going to toss these questions open to the panel in general. What are we to make of this? Anybody can. There's a hockey puck out there. Whoever grabs it first goes.
I think preseason polls are meaningless in their reliability, but they're very important because they influence everything that happens all the way down the line. I would be willing to bet that right now I can write down the top 25 teams for the preseason poll and for the 2040 season, and I might not get the order correct, but I bet I get at least 23 of the 25 teams correct.
Yeah, I think you're right. You said that quite a bit.
But then what happens is 2004 is a perfect example. Oklahoma and USC start 1 and 2, and Auburn was 18, I believe,
right,
somewhere around there. And Auburn and all 3 teams finished the season undefeated, but Auburn was left out because the number 1 and 2 teams never lost.
Well, I think it's a little bit simpler than that. It falls in line with basically the shopping seasons. You know, you got the summer season, the fall season, all that good stuff. And the preseason polls come out just, a couple of months beforehand to establish the tone. That's to get people fired up. That's to get them interested. That's to get us involved and wanting to follow this stuff. So the way that it falls out is the media knows exactly what they're doing. They're driving this cart. And it's pretty ingenious, though, to so to speak, because the fact of the matter is that you get everybody that is interested in their particular institution, their particular conference, and folks know that they've got to appease these different constituencies because that's where the TV money is.
Yeah, that's where the revenue is.
I would disagree with one thing you said. That's they come out a couple months before, because last year the championship game was on Monday, and the first poll for this season was on that Thursday.
Right, it was called, the way too early preseason.
Exactly, you're right.
Let's move on to the point that you made, that I think that is important. Really, what influence, and Steve was giving us some good evidence, and I want you to comment on this, because you went to Kansas State, Tim. What influence does the first coaches, let's use the coaches polls, because the coaches polls generally they influence each other in succeeding polls. What do you think is the impact of, let's see, they lose egregiously. What has been the influence of, let's say, Florida State with their weak schedule and staying up there as far as they have? Is it because they originally were put there and we figured, well, no one can dethrone them, so they're going to stay there?
Well, I do think they're still undefeated, so that's one of the reasons. You know, every sport except for this, what we're looking at, has got a true playoff system. We don't have a true playoff system in this.
In Division I, FBS football, no.
They even did, well, I think they just went up to 20 teams in
FCS.
what we call what we used to call one double.
The FCS, Football Championship Series. But you make a point about, I do believe they're undefeated. Well, so is Mississippi State, and so is Ole Miss. And yet they were ranked way, way down there. Okay? In fact, Mississippi State was not even in the preseason rankings. So my question is, let's suppose that Florida State had began at around number 5 or number 6, or even not even ranked.
Well,
Would they have moved up there? My question is, what influence do the early season polls have on succeeding polls? And I think Steve answered it very well in his example of 2004.
I think also what happens is that it becomes very convenient and very easy if teams don't lose just to not change the order. I've always argued, for example, like if let's say in the Egg Bowl, Ole Miss is number 2 and Mississippi State's number 1. And where are they playing this year? Starkville or?
No, they're playing Ole Miss.
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. Okay, let's say Mississippi State's number 1, Ole Miss is number 2, and they go in there and Mississippi State beats them 27-24 on a last-second field goal. Why should Ole Miss drop from number 2?
Well, that's the argument a lot of people gave with the Notre Dame.
yeah.
You know, why? Because it was so close and so tight.
But
I think that's a good argument. Go ahead.
It is a good argument, but let's go back to your question again. Why is there a need for this preseason stuff? It's because it starts the conversation. It creates the controversy. It again, there is no other thing like college football and folks getting on the bandwagon for their particular team. Florida State was chosen the perennial number 1 because they won it all last year.
Well, then why wasn't Auburn the number 2? Why weren't they number 2 in the rankings?
Well, I can't answer that because the pundits are the ones that put all of this out there and everything.
Exactly.
The simple fact of the matter is that we go through this whole thing where you said up front, we did a tremendous amount of research for this program itself. They do the same thing. They research everything, but it also goes back to the fact that the folks driving the car have a vested interest in making sure that there's some kind of commentary out there for each and every school within that conference, that top 5 conference category. And that's exactly how they do it. If you look at the way that it is, ESPN's got the Southeastern Conference. CBS has got a contract with them, okay? ABC is involved in the mix with the Big 12, and they've got Fox has got
the Big 12. ABC is tied in because they're part of Disney. And ESPN.
Exactly. Okay. But all of the top 5 conferences have some television affiliation in some capacity.
And then
So they're out there
Some of them
perpetrating.
have their own network.
Yeah, Notre Dame.
Well, and the networks are tied in because the Longhorn station was supported by who? ESPN. SEC station is supported by who? ESPN.
Okay, now, to me, that makes my argument that these polls are completely invalid, especially when you have the poll that Steve was talking about, and I saw it too. It was a way too early preseason poll that came out like 5 days after the national championship game. what function, what the purpose does that serve? I refuse to believe that the argument that these pundits have done all their research. I don't think so, because if they've done their research, there's holes just shot all through them. And, you know, I'm not opposed to polls. My concern is the same kind of thing that happened in Auburn in 2004, the influence that it leaves on the voters. Okay, let me ask you this next question, which I think I find fascinating. Now, when the college football playoff committee comes out with its first poll, do you believe that that's going to influence the other polls? And I mean this seriously. Or do you think that the AP writers and then it's the Amway coaches poll now, Amway, so buy some soap and get a coaches poll. Do you think they're going to bow their necks and go, oh no, you're wrong? What are we to make of that? Do you think that's a possibility?
We know the AP did basically tell the PCS to go away a few years ago, so they were no longer going to participate in it. And I think we all understand that the coaches poll in a lot of cases is not voted on by the coaches.
Oh, I can give you first-hand experience. I can tell you firsthand.
But and a lot of very prominent coaches have freely admitted that their SID does it, or some assistant athletic director somewhere, or a student for a research project. But you know, speaking of student research project, I had a student recently, and a doctoral student turned in a research project, and he went back 25 years, and by far, statistically, taking the final poll from the previous season is a much better indicator of what's going to happen this season than the first preseason poll. If you compare where they stayed and where they went, the movement of the teams is so. Just taking last year's final poll, where Auburn would have been number 2. I do believe, by the way, that Auburn is number 1 in the power index.
Power index, yeah, they're RFP, yeah.
Their strength of schedule is
They're
2.
ranked in the SPI, Auburn's number 1. But you see, with all this other nonsense, what we're looking at right now is something that Dr. Foley pulled out, and that was the power rankings with the resumes. And right now, it looks like they're going to say Florida State's 1, Mississippi State's 1, Florida State, Ole Miss, and Alabama. And then Auburn's right there at 5. The irony of all this is what's going to happen when Auburn and Alabama play, what happens with Ole Miss and Mississippi State play. And Florida State, there with their cupcake schedule, is, you know, of the top 5, look who has the weakest schedule.
Yeah. Florida
State at 35. Mississippi State at 19, I think that's a little bit high for them because they've played some pretty good teams. Ole Miss has a tough one. Alabama's strength of schedule is bolstered by the fact that Auburn is on it, and Auburn's number 2 for the strength of schedule. And as long as Kansas State keeps winning, that number's going to go up higher. But this aside, we're in the middle of that other question. What's going to be the upshot of, and what's going to be the influence, do you think, of the committee? Is the AP going to get all bent out of shape again and say, oh, we're not going to be a part of it?
I think the current polls will definitely have an impact on the 12-person selection committee. It's down to 12 now because Archie Manning bowed out for medical reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but I think it's yet to be determined. You know, we talk about the Alabama bump in recruiting rates.
Right.
You know, when a 3-star recruit, when the word gets out that the 3-star recruits, considering Alabama, they become a 4 or 5-star recruit.
Right.
And we could see the same thing in the AP polls. Oh, this blue ribbon panel that said these guys are really number 2. Well, then maybe I should change my vote. The fact that Alabama's 4 and Auburn's 5 right now is meaningless because they play each other.
Mm-hmm.
And same with Mississippi and Mississippi State.
Right.
So you know what will really be interesting is if Alabama beats Mississippi State and Auburn beats Ole Miss. So they're all in there with 1 loss on Thanksgiving
They're going
weekend.
to come down the Iron Bowl.
Or the Egg Bowl, either way, you know, and then what, you know, what's the if the team that Alabama beat wins the Egg Bowl, but then Auburn wins the Iron Bowl, you know, which
Auburn would only have 1 loss then,
right, and so would the winner of the Egg Bowl.
and so the winner. You're assuming that who's going to? Oh, I thought you said Alabama beats Mississippi State.
Right.
Okay. And Auburn beats Ole Miss. Okay.
And they've all got 1 loss.
Okay.
And one of the things
then if Ole Miss beats Mississippi State, and Auburn would go because Auburn has the victory over.
And they have definitely said that head-to-head competition is a factor.
Right. Right.
Okay, well,
It's
see, here's the thing.
unfortunate.
Let's Tuesday, when this all comes to play, and they rank these teams and that, let's not forget lonely little old Marshall sitting out there that's undefeated, and they're still undefeated. They are omitted, so to speak.
Marshall's strength of schedule is 126.
Yeah, it's not strict, but
That takes that into
not,
consideration.
okay, but that strength of schedule is a mere factor. Let's be honest about this whole concept of strength of scheduling though too. These schedules are put out there early on, in the process. And remember, back in the day when Marshall was very, very competitive and was beating some of these teams, what do teams do? They avoid it. We're not gonna play them. We don't want to bring them into town.
Well, I think
and beat them.
your argument runs along the same lines as Boise State and those schools.
Appalachian State.
But Marshall, I think we're kind of whistling past the graveyard. We think Marshall's going to do anything. They may get into a BCS bowl, but not with that schedule. I mean, if you take a look at one of the SOR is the strength of record. That means the record of your opponents.
Yeah,
you take a look at the record of your opponents, and Marshall's record of their opponents right now is like 24. They're not even close.
Their conference is not good.
Going back.
And to true what you say about when they schedule 20 years in advance.
Going back to what Steve said, it's really unfortunate that Auburn or Alabama, if they both go into that game, one of those teams is going to have 2 losses and be out of the top 4. Unfortunately, like Steve said, why do they have to drop out of the top 4? That's the problem.
One year, this was I believe it was in the 70s. Oklahoma was, they only played 11 games at that time. Oklahoma was 11-0, finished season number 1. Nebraska was 10-1, finished season number 2. Colorado was 9-2, finished season number 3.
1, 2, and 3. The bigs were in the old Big 8 conference.
Because Nebraska had only lost to Oklahoma and Colorado had only lost to Oklahoma and Nebraska.
Yeah.
I personally, everybody knows that watches the shows. I'm a big Auburn fan. Graduated from Auburn and worked there for several years. I still think that being the conference champion should be a huge factor in who makes the playoffs.
Yeah, that may very well be, but the conference champion in which conference? Okay, the ACC. Well, okay. The Big Ten. I agree with your argument. But it's the overall strength of the.
What's going to happen? Let's say Georgia gets upset by somebody and then loses to Auburn and then beats Alabama in the SEC championship game. Is Georgia going to be one of these 4 teams with 3 losses?
No, I doubt it.
You go back, all you're doing is alluding to the power rankings of the conferences. That's the bottom line. That's what it boils down to. I think, again, it gets back to your original premise. It doesn't. The preseason doesn't hold a whole lot of credibility until the teams get out there and actually start competing.
Well, they say that.
There's only
They say
4
that.
teams. Someone's going to be left out. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think that these 2 things, we're running short of time here. This conversation could have gone for 2 hours because this is a great panel. 2 things. Number 1, I was talking with Phil Savage. Some of you know Phil. He's local here, and he's now the executive director for the Senior Bowl and does color commentary on from the University of Alabama, Eli Gold, and he's formerly the general manager of Cleveland Browns. And he said that to be part of the overall picture, the committee should go out and watch these teams in person. He said because he went to some of the Big 12 schools and watched them play. He comes to the SEC, and he says there's no comparison of the athletes, just no comparison in size and strength and speed. And unfortunately, the committee is going to sit there. They may go to their own home games or their own away games, because most of them are ADs and so forth, but they're not going to get out and get a broad enough.
Phil Savage obviously wasn't at the Oklahoma Alabama game last year. If he said that.
Yeah, he was.
Because
he did the announcing.
I would say.
You got to get a playoff
And
system.
we're and I think that the next thing is, I think that what's going to prove, and I'll be willing to bet Steve's salary, that within 2 years, we're going to have an 18 playoff. Because I believe that the 4-team system, while it's better than BCS, is going to cause a lot more problems, particularly when you get down there to 4 and 5. It won't be so bad when you've got like 8 or 9, choose number 8. But that's the way it goes. Hey, panel, thank you. This is, as usual, an excellent job. Thank you for tuning in, and keep your requests coming in. Add them to Sports Talk at USSA.edu, and we'll do our best to get them on. So until again next week at this time, have a great week in sports.